The elements we have to look at here are, of course, when to draw, when not to draw, and I'm also going to go through some general advice for if the hand is a little bit tricky and you're not exactly sure which way to go with it. First of all, let's talk about when to draw the trumps. The classic example of when to draw trumps is when you have some winners to enjoy. But why is that? It could be because you want to prevent the opponents from ruffing your winners. So, say you have the contract in spades and you have an ace, you want to be able to enjoy your ace because otherwise it won't be a winner if the opponents get to trump it. This can get a little bit more complicated though. So sometimes you might have winners that you have to establish by force or by finessing first. So you look at them and they're not exactly an ace as in the previous example. There may be a king-queen and you have to use your king to push out the ace and then your queen will be a winner. But there's still an element of risk here where if you lose to the ace, your queen might then get ruffed. Or maybe the opponents will have a chance to set up a ruff in a different suit. So this would be an example of setting up a ruff for themselves, maybe in the suit that they led. Maybe they cotton on that they've led the wrong suit and then they change tack completely. The only thing you have to check before deciding that you're going to draw trumps is that you don't need to use those trumps for ruffing. So it's always good to do a double check of the count just to make sure that it's actually safe for you to draw trumps. Sometimes you can do both. Okay, so when to draw is fairly simple. It's kind of your default action. It's the thing you learn about in lesson 1 of declaring in the trump suit. So let's go into when not to draw, which is a little bit more complicated. The first example, and probably the most basic position that you would learn about, is when you need to ruff in the shorthand. And I'm sure that lots of you will have heard reasons why, and there are a few ways you can think about it, but I think the one I'm about to tell you is the most intuitive. So think about a potential 5-3 fit. That's normally what you're in these situations, certainly the most common one. Now, even if the trumps break as well as possible, they're going to be 3-2. So if you decided to draw trumps, you would have to draw at least 3 rounds. But if you did that, then you would no longer have any trumps left in your shorthand because you're in a 5-3 fit. If you have to play 3 trumps, you have none left. However, if you ruff with your 3 card holding first, then you can take those ruffs and you still have all of the 5 card length available to draw the trumps with. So you're effectively getting extra tricks. One thing that you need to be careful about is that there are some hands where you need to lose the lead to set up your ruff. So although on occasional hands it might be safe to draw 1 round and then start setting up your ruff, you can't always afford to do that. So you need to be a little bit aware of when it's safe to draw any rounds and when it's not safe to draw any at all. The other time when you might not be supposed to draw trumps is when you need to ruff a side suit to establish it. Let's look at an example, because this is something that people forget exists quite a lot of the time. So here's a nice one. Our side suit is ace king to 5, opposite 2 low in diamonds. So this is a 7 card fit. Often it is, could sometimes be more. And the idea here is that you're trying to establish potentially the 4th, but definitely the 5th card in the suit. So you play the ace and the king, and by the time you've done that, your 6 and 5 in the other side have gone, because you have to follow suit. And then when you play the 3rd round of the suit, if the suit turns out to break 3-3, then both opponents have to follow with their last diamond, and you can ruff, which will mean that your 2 remaining diamonds are winners, because nobody has any diamonds left. And at that point, it will then be safe to draw trumps. So you can change tack, go back to drawing trumps, and then you have those extra winners. It can also work if the suit is 4-2. So in that case, you will be able to ruff twice, and that will establish the 5th card. So instead of getting 2 extra winners, you only get 1, and you have to do a little bit more work for it, but that can still work. The only problem here is that, of course, one of the opponents only has 2 diamonds, so they might be able to over-ruff you. So in those cases, you might choose to ruff high. Another time when you might not want to draw trumps is when you need to take a pitch first. Now, if you don't understand what this term means, it just means that you need to discard a loser on an extra winner, usually a non-base hand, the short hand, and effectively make the loser disappear. So here's an example. The opponents have led the Jack of Hearts against 4 spades, and we have these hands. So why do we need to take a pitch first, and how would we do that? So think about it this way. You've actually got away with something here. You have the ace of spades to lose, and you have 3 diamonds. So in theory, the opponents could have taken the first 4 tricks. But they've made a mistake, and they haven't led a diamond. They've led a heart. So they've given you a chance here. If you try to draw trumps first, you're going to have to lose to the ace of spades, and that gives the opponents a second opportunity to get their lead right. So what you should do instead is you should play your queen of hearts, followed by the ace, and then when you play the king, you won't have any hearts left in your hand, and you can throw away a diamond. And now you only have 2 diamonds left in your base hand, so 2 diamonds that you have to lose, and the ace of spades, which brings you down to 3. Another not to draw scenario, when you need to score your trumps separately, for example on a cross-ruff, usually on a cross-ruff. Now these are kind of complicated, they sometimes look like other things, often people get confused and they think they're cross-ruffing and they're actually just ruffing a loser in the dummy. They're very, very similar. But the idea here is that your trumps can't be used for drawing because every time you draw a round of trumps, you have to play 1 from each hand. So what you want to do is you want to use 1 to ruff in the other hand, and then in your hand, and then the other hand, and then in your hand, and so on. And that means that each trump gets played on a separate trick. So look at this example. We're in 4 spades, and the opponents have led the queen of hearts. So here, it looks like just a scenario where obviously the clubs look a bit scary, and we're probably going to have to lose 3 of those, so we can't afford to lose any diamonds. So it looks like we just need to be ruffing diamonds in the dummy. But the dummy isn't actually the shorthand. There is no shorthand. So this is actually a cross-ruff. It seems similar in some ways. So what we want to do is we want to work out a situation where each of our 4 trumps in our hand and each of the 4 trumps in the dummy get played on different tricks. Now at this point I want to give you a little bit of a mental note for something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the general advice. So we've generally been counting losers, and here if you do that you can count 3 diamond losers and 3 club losers. But just a word of warning, if you do that, it won't really make it obvious that you're supposed to be cross-ruffing on this hand. So sometimes what you need to do is you need to count winners. And if you imagine that you're counting 4 winners from the length in trumps, you have the ace and king of hearts and the ace of diamonds. That only brings you to 7 tricks. So you need to find a way of scoring 3 more, which means you need to ruff the 3 diamonds. So this is how you kind of come to this conclusion. You also need to think about entries, which is where the cross-ruff comes in. You need to be able to ruff your hearts over rather than playing trumps over to your hand to ruff diamonds, which is more like what you would do in a ruffing in the shorthand scenario. So here, this is discussing what I just said, all about ruffing the diamonds, using the heart ruffs as entries. Talk it through. We win the lead in hand. We play the ace of diamonds, and we ruff a diamond. Now we only have 2 diamonds left. We cash the king of hearts, and we ruff a heart back to our hand. And now we can continue in the same way. We ruff the 3rd round of diamonds. We ruff the 4th round of hearts. And now we ruff the 4th round of diamonds. So in that way we managed to score 3 diamond ruffs on top of the 7 tricks that we counted earlier. So 8 tricks in trumps. So we've taken 8 tricks so far, and then we still have 2 trumps left in our hand. So that brings us to 10 tricks. Another time we might not want to draw trumps is when we can't afford a bad split. So maybe if the trumps are going to be 4-1, we run into problems. So here's an example. We're in a 4-4 fit. Again, we're in 4 spades. The opponents have led the queen of hearts. What do we do here? So the usual way to play the trumps would be to play ace-king in another one, expecting the trumps to be 3-2, and then when the opponents win, they play something, we win, and we knock out the ace of diamonds. Easy peasy. However, we can't afford to do that if the trumps are 4-1, because the opponents will just be able to draw our trumps and then just keep playing hearts, and what are we going to do? So what we could do is we could play the ace of trumps, just in case there's a ruff that could be taken with the singleton trump, and then we can go straight to knocking out the ace of diamonds before we go on any further. And once the ace of diamonds has been won, the opponents play something, we win, and we can draw another round of trumps and just expect to lose 2 trumps and the ace of diamonds. Now let's move on to general advice, as this is stuff that you might want to think about if you're really not sure how to play the hand. Related to the previous point, remember that mental note that we put out? Count both your winners and your losers on the hand. We're always being taught to count losers in suit contracts, but sometimes one method will actually reveal the correct line more effectively than the other method. So always good to be in the habit of doing both, especially if you feel like you're counting your losers and the hand, the right line of play isn't really emerging for you. So counting winners works particularly well on cross-ruff hands, such as the one that we saw earlier where we made the mental note, but also more complicated things like dummy reversals and squeeze hands. Counting winners is a better way of spotting those. Counting losers is more of a kind of run-of-the-mill technique, which is probably why we learn it when we start learning bridge. It works well on hands where you need to pitch something, like the one we discussed earlier, and rough losers in the shorthand. And sometimes if you need to do both of those things, they kind of combine quite well. The final thing I want you to consider, if you're not sure and you've done all of these things and you're still umming and ahhing, a little gem of advice that you might not have considered. When you have fewer than half of the points, it's actually really unlikely to be best to draw trumps. It doesn't necessarily work the other way around. It doesn't mean if you've got loads and loads of points, you always draw trumps. But the idea is that the reason we're drawing trumps is to enjoy our winners. But if we have fewer than half of the high card points, we're not expecting that we have that many winners overall in the hand because we don't have that many honours. So in that case, the trumps aren't an obstacle in the same way, but they might be our way of getting our contract when we don't have another way of scoring tricks. Okay, so now it's time for you to head to the tournament on Funbridge and go ahead, give the practice hands a try, see how you get on. There are some difficult things in there, but I will see you in the deal analysis, and good luck.